Well, welcome to A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. We are here today, as we are every Saturday at 4, unless we're not. And we are here with the topic that faith and reason are not opposites. Interesting that young Sheldon is dealing with that issue this week and next. If you're a fan of the show, I won't give you any spoilers, but it's kind of interesting with in his very set ways. We're trying to get are you trying to get rid of the shadow?
Yeah. I don't know what
maybe turn on one camera. Oh, wait, one light, I mean. Oh, one light is on. Okay, I wonder if it's the other light that makes the difference.
I don't know.
Why don't you go play with the lights? I'll hold
Okay,
this.
hold that and you keep talking.
Okay. So anyway, Sheldon, as an adult, had difficulty with thinking flexibly about things. That seems to have solved the problem. I think it's the lights over us we're still working on lighting issues and whatnot. Still trying to get this webcast to a little more professional look. We get a little bit of it, but it's below the banner, at least for now, till the sun goes down. But because we're in the sanctuary, we get a lot of different light things going on. We'd like to turn his old office into a sound booth where we could broadcast from. But for now, this is where the equipment is, and so this is where we can broadcast from. So anyway, that being said, young Sheldon, even as an adult, Sheldon had trouble with thinking flexibly about the world. And so this is a challenge for him as he's taken a philosophy class in college.
Yeah. Well, he's being exposed for the first time to the issues of epistemology.
Yes.
And epistemology, what it deals with is the question of how do we know that we know? That is, how do you know the things that you know? And so one of the things in young Sheldon, the teacher presented this to him, is that everything we know about the world is mediated to us through our senses. That is, and then of course the question is, how reliable are those senses? The nice thing for philosophy teachers is that the movie The Matrix came out, and so Rene Descartes' old question about what if your brain is in a vat and some mad scientist is experimenting on you and feeding you things and making you think that the world around you is the way it is. With The Matrix now, everybody kind of gets that notion. And that is the problem. And so what's scary to some people is that we have to simply assume that the external universe actually exists, and we assume that our senses are feeding us accurate information, all things being equal, assuming we're not insane, and assuming we're not drunk, assuming we're not high on drugs, not ill, not too hungry, that everything is more or less normal, that our senses are probably giving us accurate information. One of the things young Sheldon pointed out was the idea that you compare what you think you're seeing to what other people are seeing as well. Of course,
For confirmation,
of course, again, we're assuming that the other people actually exist and they're not just figments of your imagination being fed into you by the Matrix.
Right.
So it's the foundation that we stand on is not as firm as we'd like to imagine, but in everything we do, and this is something that's also hard for people to understand, although if you've taken geometry, you have a concept of this. That is, in any system, you have certain assumptions that you're going to make. So for instance, in geometry, plane geometry, Euclidean geometry, you have what are called axioms, and you just memorize the axiom, what the definition of the thing is. There's no proof for an axiom. It's just something you assume. And the rest of geometry then is built on top of those axioms, and so you have the definition of a point, definition of a line, and so on. They're axioms, you cannot prove them. They're just givens. And so as members of Western civilization, what we assume as givens are, like I said, that our senses are accurately giving us information. We assume the external universe is actually there. In some philosophies, some Eastern philosophies particularly, those are not strongly held assumptions. Now, most people, even if they are extremely, say, solipsistic, the idea that the universe revolves around you and everything else is an illusion, you still probably look both ways before you cross the street. You probably stop.
Well, you don't want to get run over by an illusion because that could end your illusions.
Yeah.
Permanently.
So we live our lives, practically speaking, with those assumptions, regardless of what weirdness you want to try to do philosophically. Your day-to-day existence, again, you just live as if those things are true. That's the nature of Western civilization. Western civilization, because of its success, that is, our technology and everything else that we do, has come to dominate world civilization. And so even those parts of the world that underneath have this philosophy that's different than Western civilization, nevertheless live as if they are members of Western civilization. So for instance, a Hindu or a Buddhist is still going to look both ways before he crosses the street, and so on. That is, they conduct themselves as if they're members of Western civilization. Japan is a Western nation. China now has become a Western nation, regardless of Confucianism in China, which tended to not be as objectivistic in its orientation. Still, nevertheless, the success of Western objectivity, rationalism, all of these things have created the world that we live in. Now, that being said, we as human beings tend towards an emphasis on our feelings as opposed to rationality. And we live once again in what would be classified, we've had this discussion before, would be classified as romantic era. That is, where emotion trumps rational thinking, which is unfortunate. And yet again, people live their lives most of the time in a more rational way. But then you get some very weird things in the society that are not rational. So, one of the things that young Sheldon would argue, and you see that it's reflected in the storylines.
Don't give away spoilers, though. I said I wouldn't give spoilers for this episode.
I'm not giving spoilers.
Okay. All right.
We're talking in more generalities because it's
Just
something
wanna make
that's come
sure.
up several times in
Right.
the story. That is, young Sheldon has decided that he doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in the Bible. And you see that periodically with his interactions with the poor pastor of his church. And that poor pastor is out of his depth in dealing with someone like Sheldon.
Well, he's not a good one, I would say. He doesn't seem to be very well educated as a pastor.
Yeah, well, that was where I was going.
Okay. Sorry. Well, you've done it to me. I'm doing it back.
Exactly.
Cheers.
That's perfectly all right. But yes. And see, this is one of the difficulties. When people want to criticize a position that they don't agree with, what they will do is find the weakest representation of that particular belief system and attack that. That's called a straw man argument. What you want to do in criticizing another belief system is to take the strongest representation of that and then deal with that. One of the key things, I enjoy a lot of what Jordan Peterson says and writes. And one of the things he says that's important to do when you're having an argument or a discussion with someone is one of the ground rules should be that you should be able to give the other person's argument clearly and well enough that the other person is satisfied, so that you know that for sure that you've done it well. An example of where I've done this, and it pleased me when I saw it, although the circumstances did not please me. In my senior year of college, I did a magazine article, a two-part magazine article on British Israelism, and also did a 100-page thesis on British Israelism. and published, and then several years later with the Quartzel School of Theology, I put the magazine article up on our school's website. And something that I do periodically because of what I'm about to say, I Googled myself because I want to see what kind of links you're being given to, where my name's showing up and what's going on. And I discovered that a neo-Nazi or white supremacist website had taken part of my British Israelism thing and published it on their site. And I gave them a takedown notice, and I gave them a choice. They could either take it down or they could link back to the original article. They chose to take it down because the article would have debunked what they were trying to do. But what they did is they took my definition of what British Israelism is, what British Israelism believes, and used that as, yes, this is what we're all about. So I had obviously done it properly. But that's what you want to do. You want to make your argument of the other person's statements so clear and comprehensible that they will be satisfied that you've done it right.
Then it becomes easier to debunk them because you fully understand them.
Right. If you don't fully understand the other side, you can't debunk it.
Right.
And so the problem with Sheldon's pastor is, of course, that he's not well educated. And the reality is, though, a lot of Christians are at that level. And,
Sheldon's the only one that challenges them.
Right.
Nobody, and of course, to some degree, it's the writers. They've made him kind of a simpleton, and all the other people are kind of simpletons, so that Sheldon will stand out really strongly as just being this total brainiac.
And it's a comedy.
It is a comedy, yeah. It's not.
So it's funny, and they're not mean about it.
Right. But I think it shows, though, that nobody else ever challenges the pastor. It's only ever Sheldon. He's the only one that questions everything that the pastor says. And in quite good ways, I would add.
Yes.
One of the things, by the way, we do run the show in 10-minute segments. So at the end of, if anyone has questions or comments, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, I distracted myself. Put it in the comments, and at the end of the 10 minutes, I've already set the timer, so we have just under 7 minutes till our next question and comment break. So if you have a question, a comment, or a show idea, put it in the comments as soon as you think of it, and then we'll backtrack and address any comments, questions, or possible show ideas.
Yes.
Which, incidentally, next week we have a show that we're doing because of your request.
Yes.
So,
what about hell?
Yes. So, but anyway.
Want to know what hell is? Come listen to us.
So, which is not to say that being here is hell.
Well, that was the
joke. I know.
Okay.
But I'm qualifying it. Yeah.
You think they'd actually worry about that?
Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to point out was we both listened to Scott Adams. He is the
guy that does Dilbert.
Yeah, he's the creator of Dilbert. He's very funny, very intelligent. He is not a believer, and he believes that we live in
a simulation,
and that there's a programmer. And I told Robin, I said, why not just call it God? And somebody's even addressed that with him, and he said, you can call the programmer anybody, whoever you want, but I just prefer to think that I'm in a simulation, which, if you think about it, we kind of are.
Yes.
My girls used to play The Sims when they were little, and well, not little, but when they were younger, when they were teenagers, they would play Sims. And I would do like Zoo Tycoon and stuff like that.
Let all the animals out and eat everybody.
Yeah, that was fun. So I built up this really nice zoo to where it was like functioning kind of normally. There wasn't much else to do. So what I would do then is the people are all there visiting, and then I would let out the animals that were prey, like the zebras and things like that. And then I would release the lions and the predator animals, and it was a bloodbath. They would pick up the other animals and shake them. Blood would go everywhere. Who knew that they built this into, like, someone there thought somebody's going to do this.
Human beings, by their nature, are going to always think of what's the nasty thing I can do.
Yeah.
Everybody becomes serial killers.
That's right. because it's safe there. But
Yeah.
that's how I would end my fun in Zoo Tycoon. Then I just build a new zoo. But after, resetting it because everyone was dead,
Yes.
except the lions. But eventually they starved to death because they ate everybody. But
Yes.
I don't think they actually starved. But I usually ended the game before that. But anyway, so to a certain degree, we are in an animation or a simulation, if you want to take it to that extent. And that's kind of what The Matrix addresses too, although I don't remember much about the movie. I was going through a really hard time in my life and I couldn't watch The Matrix. I actually took a nap during it because we were at the movie theater. I decided that sleeping was the better choice rather than watching it because I was having trouble tolerating some of the scenes. So I haven't actually watched The Matrix, but based on what you described, it's kind of the same thing where we're living in this fake
Although
world.
the reason for it is because the computers have taken over and they're using human beings as batteries.
Okay, so.
Which is not particularly reasonable, but anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, but I do recommend listening to Scott Adams. He has I listened to the podcast part of it. It's called Coffee with Scott Adams, and he's really good. He's very, very good. So he does a lot of political commentary and stuff, but he will tell you that he's left of Bernie, but better at math. But he's not a Bernie supporter, and he's not really a Biden supporter. So anyway, he's kind of interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
So
He doesn't like anybody.
yeah, he doesn't like anybody. He hates everybody all the same. He doesn't discriminate. So no.
Anyway.
But he's very interesting to listen to.
Yeah, he is. Just it's a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, in Young Sheldon, he challenges what the pastor, and through that Christianity and what it believes, and its reasonableness. And part of that, and bringing up Scott Adams is interesting because part of the reason that he decided to reject Christianity, he was raised in the church, is because he didn't get satisfactory answers to the question of Jonah and the whale.
Fish, yeah.
And of course, the problem, and see, on a popular level, most Christians miss the whole thing as well, because if you start asking yourself, how would Jonah survive 3 days in the belly of a whale? You've missed the point of the story. That is, the point of the story is not him being in the whale.
Which is Scott Adams' sticking point with the story, is that there's just no way somebody could live inside of a whale for 3 days.
Right.
So.
But that's not the point of the story.
He told his parents, church is hogwash, I don't want to go anymore.
And we'll get to that issue in a little bit, but really, you're missing the point of the stories too often when you start focusing on that sort of thing, because the focus of the story is not on that issue. The issue of Jonah is the fact that he did not give a damn about the Ninevites and wanted to see them die. And he was willing to die himself in order to avoid having to preach to them, because he knew if he did, they would repent. And he did not want them to repent. He wanted God to kill them all.
And he knew God was basically a nice guy and was going to give them another chance.
Right, and he didn't want them to have another chance. And he didn't want to serve God to give them another chance. And so he was going to run away. And so that's the point of the whole story, and his transformation, and how God is not just for the Israelites, God is for everybody. But anyway, that's the point of the story of Jonah. And so this poor pastor in Young Sheldon is like your average Christian to some extent. He does not have much understanding of science, philosophy. He doesn't seem to know the Bible that well either. He's just kind of muddling through. It's what he's used to doing.
Well, he just wants people that will listen to his Sunday sermons, come to Sunday school, go to Bible study, and then go home and mind their own business.
Right.
But
the mistake that people make when they think about God is that, and this is where you'll get people getting mad at you if you start saying specific things about God or criticizing whatever position they have about him, is that people think of religion as being like having a favorite song or having, you like pizza better than hamburgers or whatever. That it's all just a matter of taste and what you're comfortable with and what makes you feel good. And what we have to comprehend is that either God actually exists or else he doesn't exist. That is, it's not just if it makes you feel warm and happy, then that's fine, that's your truth. No. That is, there's lots of things that may make you feel warm and happy that are make-believe. That is, I enjoy watching Star Trek, but Star Trek is not real. I like Doctor Who, but Doctor Who is not real. There are a lot of things that give me warm fuzzy that have nothing to do with reality.
Okay, so...
And so if God is actually real, then it's like trying to, when you're thinking in terms of, well, who is God and what's he like? It's like if you have a bottle filled with jelly beans and you're trying to guess how many jelly beans are in there. You may guess wrong, but there is a certain number of jelly beans that are in there. Somebody once made the statement that you can't run an experiment on God. That is, you can't set up hypothesis and run do experiments and find out what God is like. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate. Because if God actually exists, then yes, there are things that you could say that are true. There would be things that you could say that are false.
Well, and the experiments have been run. There was the God contest in the Old Testament. Was that with Elijah? Elijah. I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, but of course, the problem with that is that's not happening now under controlled conditions.
Right. But still, there is
But yes,
God
it was a
contest.
God contest,
Yes.
and
God won because he is the actual
God
God.
actually intervened, and
Right.
Yahweh intervened, and Baal did not. And Elijah had a lovely time making fun of Baal and saying, well, maybe he's on a trip, or maybe he's in the bathroom, or maybe he's sleeping, or get louder, wake him up, get his attention.
Okay, so Scott Adams has made this assertion as well. By the way, we passed the 10-minute mark. We didn't have any comments or anything or questions, so I'll continue asking your questions for you. But so Scott Adams makes the contention that each person who has religion in their life believes that they have the true religion. So whether you're Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or Baptist or Catholic or Buddhist or Hindu or any of those things, you believe you have the true religion. Aren't you lucky? But how can every one of us have the true religion? And so what would you, if Scott Adams were sitting here and he posed that to you, how would you respond to that?
Well, it's like with scientists. That is, you'll have, say, for instance, with the issue of quantum physics. That is, we know that the quantum realm operates differently than what we're used to. And we have a lot of things, that is, all scientists have a lot of things in common with what they think about quantum physics, but there's at least 9 different major interpretations of quantum physics, and of course the scientists there in each group are going to think that their position is most likely to be correct. And thus far, the experiments that have been run have not been enough to eliminate any of the hypotheses. And as far as the math is concerned and day-to-day usage of things, everything's working. The differences don't matter. Now, when you think in terms of Christians and you look at the different denominations, most of the differences are going to be on matters of practice. That is, how do you do the Lord's Supper? When do you do the Lord's Supper? How do you baptize? When do you baptize? How do you conduct your service? Is it liturgical? Do you follow the church calendar? That sort of thing. Even among the major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, at least we all agree there's only one God. So there's some commonality even among the different religious groups, no matter what, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, any of them, there are certain things that we hold in common. Our basic concepts of morality are a universal human thing. And so that's an interesting question of why. Jordan Peterson, I just started reading a book, and the title on my head is his first book. But anyway, what he's dealing with is why, as you look at the different civilizations around the world, why is there so much commonality in mythology and a lot of these basic details? That is, there's a lot of things that are pretty much the same.
Well, you have creation stories in every culture.
Creation stories in all
you
cultures.
have flood stories in almost everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and also every civilization seems to have the concept of a divine being. In fact, there's the weird thing, it's called the high God concept. And even in polytheistic, primitive sorts of cultures, they seem to have this notion of a high God that they've lost contact with. And so they have to spend their time dealing with the bureaucrats underneath, as it were, the lower level gods.
Like the god of thunder, god of trees, god of this, god of that.
Because
they can control that.
They affect their immediate lives, and the high God they can't seem to reach anymore for whatever reason, and so they worry about these other things instead.
The volcano god is easily appeased by throwing a virgin in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. But this other god, well, and you see that in Acts on Mars Hill. When Paul goes on to Mars Hill and there's all these idols to all these gods, but then there's the altar to the one unknown God. And so he says to them, I see that you're very religious. You have so many gods. Let me tell you about this one over here that you seem to not know anything about. And he introduces them to God. Right. The God.
And there's a book, I don't know if it's still in print, it's called Eternity in Their Hearts. And what he points out is in missionary work they've found, again, this high God. And what they try to do is when a missionary goes out, they try to understand the culture and understand what their religious framework is so that they're careful in how they present the gospel. One of the early mistakes with one group is they heard the name of this particular deity, and so they tried to use that as the hook to. Turned out that was their devil figure.
Oh no!
So you have to really make sure. Yeah, you have to make sure you really understand what you're dealing with before you can. So Paul was very effective. He understood, the unknown God, and he was able to use that then as a springboard to reach the Gentiles.
Right. Well, having been, because he was born Jewish, but he was educated as a Roman, right?
He was a Roman citizen born in a Roman colony.
Oh, okay.
And so he was exposed, growing up
so he
to
knew
Roman
those
and
things
Greek
already.
culture, Greek-speaking area. Then he was trained as a rabbi.
Okay, that's right.
And so he had an understanding of both cultures pretty well.
It's fascinating to me. So we're doing this book in Sunday school called Reading Scripture Through Western Eyes. And the chapter that we're in now is talking about, I forget what the title is, but it's how the Bible is written from a collectivist culture viewpoint. And the two guys who wrote this book were both missionaries to cultures that were collectivist cultures, but they're from a Western point of view. And it's interesting because they were reading the English version of the translation of Psalm 23 from this one people group that one of them worked with. And it's fascinating. I was laughing because of the way that that it was written to, like, from their perspective. And it was amusing. But I highly recommend the book. And it's a really fascinating read as far as how we view things so differently in the rest of the world. One of the things that was interesting, because if you ask people about going to school and who liked group work, kids hate it because it's a collectivist concept that we're not used to in Western society. And so you have the overachiever kid who wants the good grade and will do all the work, and then you have the slacker who's going to sit back and let the overachiever do it because the slacker doesn't want to do it, and then they all get the same grade. Although I've worked around that. When my kids work as a team, they each write in a different color, and whoever, if somebody doesn't have enough of their color on the paper, and they're only given one colored pencil, so it's not like they can swap around. If there's too little of your color, you get graded down. If there's too much of your color, you get graded down. I would rather have the assignment be incomplete and that the overachiever just do their part, and because then that makes those slackers work harder. And but anyway, so that's how I put a little Western bent into that. But yeah, if you ask anybody now, usually the slackers like group work because somebody else did their work. It was usually the smart kid and the overachiever kid who got A's, so then that would boost their grade. But the overachiever kids hated working in groups or in teams in school because it was a collective grade, and the overachiever would end up having to do all the work because you had the kids that wouldn't do anything. And then you had the little workhorse kids that they're not going to take over, but they'll do what the overachiever asks them to do. So the workhorse kids, everybody likes because they kind of help get the job done, but it's that slacker that really screws up the works. But anyways, we didn't have any comments yet or anything like that, so we're just going to keep pressing on, and so we'll continue.
Okay, now one of the things that people imagine is in contradiction to rationality and reason are the miracles that we see in the Bible. And a lot of people, both Christian and not, will define miracle as being a violation of the laws of nature. The problem, of course, is that that's really not what the definition of a miracle is. Now, there was clarity rendered among theologians, although it pre-existed David Hume. But David Hume was a skeptic, and he wrote in, let's see if I've got his book Inquiries. He wrote, "A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as firm and unalterable experience has established these laws, the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. Nothing is esteemed a miracle if it ever happens in the common course of nature. It is no miracle that a man seeming in good health should die of a sudden, because such a kind of death, though more unusual than any other, has yet been frequently observed to happen. But it is a miracle that a dead man should come to life, because that has never been observed in any age or country. There must therefore be a uniform experience against every miraculous event, otherwise the event would not merit the appellation. And as a uniform experience amounts to a proof, there is here a direct and full proof from the nature of the fact against the existence of any miracle, nor can such proof be destroyed or the miracle rendered credible, but by an opposite proof which is superior." And against an eyewitness of somebody seeing someone raised from the dead, David Hume then asked whether it's more likely the eyewitness was deceived or that the dead man was restored to life. And so if it's more likely that the person would be deceived or made a mistake, that's a more reasonable way of going than thinking something as unusual as somebody coming back from the dead happened. The problem with David Hume's critique of the miraculous, though, is in his original assumption, which is, what is a miracle? If a miracle is the violation of natural laws, then Hume has a point. But that is not how theologians actually define miracle. It's the way a lot of people do that are not specialists, but it's actually not how it's defined. And that was an error on David Hume's part, because what a miracle is, from a theological standpoint, is simply God intervening in his universe in some way. And it is no different than a human being intervening in the universe. That is, when you plow a field, plant corn, and have it come up in nice, neat rows, that's not natural. It's because of the human intervention that you have that happen. Corn is the way it is now, a nice, tasty thing, rather than this little scraggly plant because of human intervention in breeding it so it ends up the way it actually is now.
Well, I think a really
An airplane flying in the sky is not a miracle, it is human inventiveness.
I think a really good example of what a miracle is reading Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Right.
Just the sheer lighting of a match made him magical because he could create fire from a stick.
Yes.
And for us, that's like no big deal. Now we have lighters and all that kind of stuff. To us, that's not a miracle, but to a society that's never seen it before, that's a huge miracle. Just the fact that we can cure some forms of cancer now, that's a miracle. The fact that we were able to come out with the vaccine as quickly as we did for COVID, even though we're still having trouble getting it out there, because it was so fast, there's some trouble with the manufacturing keeping up with the demand. But all these things are very miraculous, and really just the fact that a baby is conceived and born healthy is a miracle every time it happens. Even though you can now see inside the womb, you can see what's happening.
These are all things that are a consequence of our technological advance.
Right.
And so one of the things that I enjoy telling people is that, God is more technologically advanced than we are, as he understands the universe that he created in intimate detail. And so it's very easy for him to manipulate it. That is, the more we understand how the universe works, the more we are able to gain control of it and use it to our advantage. That is, quantum physics, when it first was realized, seemed very esoteric, and what's the practical benefit of it? And yet you're sitting here listening to us now on an electronic device that fundamentally depends on our understanding of how quantum physics works. As the whole electronic industry is built on that. And so it's no longer esoteric, it's very practical. But that's the value of doing science, is that you learn and understand the universe more and more detail, and you never know what you may be able to do as a consequence of that. And so, for instance, some of the quote-unquote miracles of the Bible that seem inexplicable and how could that happen, we do them now. Virgin births are not miraculous anymore. They can be done quite easily, relatively speaking. That is, we have the technology. Bringing people back from the dead, which David Hume talked about, we do that now. I mean, you can't be dead for an extended period of time. You can't be smelling bad, but if you're dead for a brief period, we can bring you back, and we keep pushing that envelope more and more, and we can understand how, if we could actually repair everything well enough, there may not be a lot of limits to this.
Well, and it's interesting too, because my kids and I were reading about George Washington this week, and he died of a throat infection. Well, that wouldn't happen now. He probably had strep throat, and that wouldn't happen now because we have antibiotics. Yeah, boom. Problem solved. Within 24 hours, you are healed.
Yes.
So we can heal throat infections that used to kill people.
Yeah, time traveler can go back and fix them. Change history.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, actually. People dying of easily cured illnesses in the past.
Yeah.
You look at them and you can, to some extent it's a little bit of guesswork as far as what actually took some of these people out, but especially, doctors looking at the symptoms they're described and, how they went, they have a pretty good sense.
Well,
and with modern medicine, most of these people would not have
Right. Well, the movie The Dig.
Yes.
She kept having she kept calling it heartburn. We don't know what it was, but she kept holding herself right here, and I thought, I bet she's got gallbladder disease, because that's right where it hurt for me, and they kept telling me that I had really bad heartburn. And I didn't. I had a bad gallbladder, and they removed it, and I was fine. And she didn't die immediately. they didn't say exactly when she died. She didn't die during the movie.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But she, that's very likely what she had.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it could be based on my experience and the way she was acting. It seems like that could be a thing.
I'm not sure what medical science was able to do in 19. I would think they could do some surgeries.
But they may not have known about that then.
Yeah,
so.
I don't know. It'd be something to
Look up. Yeah.
See when they.
Plus, then the availability of medical, because she was kind of out in the toolies too. Although she was a wealthy woman,
so she could have afforded it.
Yeah, but it sounded like she didn't like going to the doctor.
Yeah.
She never went to the doctor for it. So.
Don't know.
But just cancers. I mean,
yeah, a lot of cancers are curable now.
Well, and they know that most breast cancers are survivable. Yeah, my mom.
Ovarian cancer, because it caught it early enough.
Yeah,
she's fine.
Yep. So, and like a lot of breast cancers that people used to die from, they don't have to anymore because now we understand the DNA of the tumors and can fight them. And there are some breast cancers that are still deadly, but there are some that are quite easily curable. And you have to go through treatments. That's not easy, but by the standard of just 30 years ago or 40 years ago, I talked about my aunt who was diagnosed with breast cancer. Well, she died. It metastasized, and she died when Vanessa was a baby. So almost 30 years ago, she lived with her breast cancer about 10 years or so. And so that puts it at about 40 years. And they just threw everything but the kitchen sink at her. They would remove your breasts. They would throw whatever chemicals they had your way, hoping something would work. And now they get it right down to, when my mother was having her chemotherapy, they would create her chemo stuff in the pharmacy right then. Like, we would go in there and we would wait while it was brought down or up from, we were in the basement, so probably up from or down from the pharmacy. But, to that special concoction just for her kind of cancer. So that in itself is miraculous, even though it's not instantly fixed like on Star Trek. On Star Trek, you get anything wrong with you and they go, bleep, 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 fixed. You're done. Get back into the engine room and start working.
Yeah.
Very little downtime. No sick days allowed on the Enterprise because you just see bones and he would delete you and you were done.
Yeah. And we're moving in that direction where things can be taken care of relatively quickly.
Well, just telehealth alone, there's a lot of things that you don't need to actually go to the doctor for and get yourself exposed to stuff. When one of my daughters gets pink eye really easily, all she has to do is do a telehealth visit. They prescribe it. She can now have the pharmaceuticals delivered to her. My one daughter had an ear infection, and she just talked to the doctor over the phone, and he prescribed the medication. We went and got it, but super easy. Now, there are some things they still need to touch you for. You can't do, your woman's visit over telephone.
Yeah, and the surgery I had back in December, I had to actually show up at the hospital so they could do it.
Right.
But what's remarkable about that
mostly because your phone wouldn't fit there.
Yeah, but what's remarkable about that even is, I went there in the morning and I'm home again by the afternoon. I mean, it was in and out.
Yeah, what they used to keep, my mom's hip surgery, what they used to keep you for, they would keep you for like a week or so for hip replacement surgery.
Yeah.
And now the surgery that they do, you don't even have restrictions on. You do for just the healing period, but people that had the posterior or the side one, I forget what it's called, they would forever have restrictions on crossing their legs, standing and turning certain ways. You had to be really careful so the hip didn't come out of its socket. But my mom had hip replacement surgery, and she only was in the hospital overnight because hers was late in the day. And then, so she spent the night in the hospital. The next day they had her with physical therapy just to teach her how to use the walker and how to stand up and sit down and how to navigate stairs, because she has stairs in her house. and how to do those things with her walker and that. And then once they were sure that she was able to manage being at home, they sent her home. She was home. I don't even know if she was in the hospital a whole 24 hours. Might have been close. But anyway, and now she has no restrictions. And here's another one. They go, what surgeries have you had? And she's like, well, I had hip replacement. I go, don't forget about your arm. And she's like, oh yeah, she broke both of my mom. Sounds like a train wreck. Sorry, Mom, she's listening. But it was shortly after my dad died, and she was coming back from the neighbor's house. There's a little tiny wall between their driveway and her driveway. And rather than walk around, she thought, I'll just climb over this. Well, she was 70-something years old when she did this. And her foot caught on the wall, and she went down and landed on both of her arms, and she broke her arms. This one, well, I don't remember which one it is. One of them was broken so badly, she had to have titanium put in there, she has screws and whatnot in there. But
she drove herself to the hospital.
Well, to the doctor.
To the doctor
yeah.
with 2 broken arms.
Yes. Under the influence of pain medication. I told her that's a big no-no because you can get stopped by the police. So here would be my 70-year-old mother, 2 broken arms, in jail. She can't break out because she can't use a saw. I'd have to bail her out. But anyway, poor Mom. But and even that, she forgets that she had that done because that's so fixable. Mm-hmm. If she had done that 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, she would have issues with her hand, and she doesn't have any issues with either of those arms. Or her hip.
Yeah.
And now she's having an issue with her cancer. God keeps throwing stuff at her. It's like, man, she just will not go down.
Missing, ducking.
Miss me again.
Yes. Oh, dear. But when you think in terms of the miraculous and that it's God intervening on things and he's not violating the laws of physics, I mean, the whole notion of him violating natural law is a little bit weird when you think in terms of, you ask yourself the question, would he violate his moral laws? Mm-hmm. What is the fundamental difference between those two things?
Right.
And in fact, if you look at, say, Jeremiah as an example, where he talks about his relationship with the nation of Israel, and also with establishing David as king, he says, this is what the Lord says, if I have not made my covenant with day and night and established the laws of heaven and earth, then I will reject the descendants of Jacob, and David my servant will not choose one of his sons to rule over the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You have him making an equivalent between his promise to a human being and the laws of physics. That he's not going to break the laws of physics any more than he'd break the promise he made to David. And so to imagine him breaking the laws of physics in order to do something miraculous is just weird.
Well, and according to Scotty, you can't change the laws of physics.
And you cannot change the laws of physics. Plus, there's a little point. That is, going back to Scott Adams and Jonah surviving in the whale, under normal circumstances, no, you're not likely to survive in a whale. But if you have some advanced technology, why not?
Yep.
That is, we can imagine ways of having, bundling somebody up so that they could survive for, 2 or 3 days inside a whale. If we wanted to, we have no real reason to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody that needs to spend 3 days living inside a whale. A whale wouldn't like it a whole lot either.
They've cut open sharks and found pretty amazing things that are whole inside of a shark.
Yeah, well, it takes a while for them to
digest, right. But what I'm saying is, if you could find license plates and things like that inside of sharks, certainly stuff could live inside. And who knows how long it takes something to die inside of a whale.
Yeah,
You've not been inside of a whale.
Yeah, I don't really want to be inside a whale.
Yeah, I mean, Pinocchio had that experience.
Yeah. And minor caveat for those that worry about such things, the Hebrew word that's translated there in the story of Jonah and this creature, it's pronounced dog.
Woof.
Woof. But it means anything that swims in the ocean. So it could be either fish or a whale. As they didn't specify, they didn't have the distinction between that. We make the mistake sometimes in translating from one language to another and imagining it's a cipher. It's not.
What's a cipher?
That's where you simply
speak English.
replace one letter with the equivalent letter. That is, you have those decoder rings, and what it is, you have two circles of the alphabet, and so you want to, make.
Like in A Christmas Story.
And so you place, you move it over one, and so when you write A, it's B, and so on, and so it's one letter off, or you can make it 3 letters off or 4 letters. That's a cipher.
All you end up with is drink more Ovaltine.
Yeah. But anyway, languages don't work that way. That is, it's not, okay, you have this word, dog, in Hebrew, that means fish in English. No. It's not that clear cut. It's fuzzier.
The semantic range.
The semantic range, technical term.
I learned that.
Yes.
Was it last time or the time before that we talked about semantic range?
The semantic range, English has well over 1 million words in it. Hebrew has, or at least the biblical language, you have about 6,000. That means those 6,000 words have to work a lot harder to explain things than what an English word does. English words are more specialized.
Well, and it depends too on how advanced the civilization is. Like, for
That's
example,
true, too.
when the Bible talks about to the ends of the earth, they mean the land that they can see.
Right.
They don't mean the actual whole entire planet.
Well, they don't
in
even
the
have
oceans.
that
Right.
concept.
That's what I mean. They didn't have that concept of there's 7 seas and 7 continents and all that. It's just the land that they could see.
Yeah, well, the word that's translated as earth in a lot of English translations is a word that more commonly simply means land, as opposed to a word that means sea or the word that means sky. They're not thinking in terms of a blue ball spinning in space.
Right.
They don't have that concept.
So if you didn't have a lot of experience with fish in terms
And the
of
Israelites were not seagoing people.
right, I mean they fished, they had fishermen and stuff.
Yeah.
They fished, but they had the fish that they caught, and they didn't
go very far into the
right.
ocean.
So they didn't know about the Loch Ness monster or Sigmund and the Sea Monsters.
Yes.
They didn't have Saturday morning
Well, the
kids
poor
shows,
people,
Sabbath morning kids shows.
They didn't have coffee or chocolate either, which
Yes,
is
very sad.
nobody in the Bible ever ate chocolate or drank coffee because it simply didn't exist yet for them.
Yes,
It's very sad.
yes. Moment of silence.
Yes. So when theology is done, a theologian is making use of both the biblical materials as well as pretty much everything else. That is, one of the concepts in theology is the idea that God has chosen to reveal himself in multiple ways. You have special revelation where he shows up and, hey, I've got some information for you. And so we regard the Bible as being that. When Jesus was walking around on earth and talking to people, that's pretty special revelation. You're getting detailed, specific words explaining stuff. But we also can learn about God from the universe that he created, just like you can learn about an artist or a composer or a writer based on the work that they have done. You can tell something about a carpenter based on his work. That is he a good carpenter or not, or is he sloppy? Plumbers, whatever, you see what they're doing and it tells you something about them. And so we look at the universe and that gives us some information about God. Also, you look at history, that would tell you something about God. And all these different things, culture, language, everything plays into giving us perhaps some insights into who and what God is. And so a theologian, if they're doing their job properly, should know as much as possible about as many things as possible, because all of those things can have some impact on your understanding of who and what God is. Frank Tipler, physicist from Tulane University, And he's famous for what's called the Tipler cylinder and also for the anthropic principle. Tipler cylinder is a proposal for how you could do time travel.
Oh, okay.
You take a very
No idea what you're
large
talking about.
quantity of newtonium, and make this, 100 or 1,000 mile long cylinder, massive thing, spin it up. And if you aim a ship just at the right point around this thing, it will send you to a different time. So from a practical standpoint, it would be hard to pull off. But from a theoretical standpoint, it would probably work.
Is that why the thing in Timeless spun? Remember that show Timeless? The thing would spin?
No, that
Oh,
had nothing to do with it. It's
okay.
just because it was a neat looking effect for the science fiction show.
Okay. That was a good show. I wish it had survived longer.
Yeah. The closest equivalent is what you see happening in Star Trek, where they will do a loop around the sun, go fast.
Oh,
That's similar to what a Tipler cylinder would do.
okay.
So that's where that thing comes from, where like in Star Trek 4 with the whales,
Oh, okay.
where they go back in time to rescue the whales, and they do a loop around the sun to do that.
Okay.
That's essentially, they're using the sun as if it's a Tipler cylinder.
Okay.
Although the sun by itself probably wouldn't be sufficient for that. Newtonium, large, is the size of the cylinder the Tipler imagined would have a lot more mass than what the sun has. Which is why, from an engineering standpoint, it'd be really hard to pull off. But that's beside our point, perhaps. Anyway, what was I going to say about Frank Tipler? And then the anthropic principle, well, that'd be another long, diverse,
Could be
funny
another
trail.
show.
Could be another show. Anyway, he wrote a book called The Physics of Immortality. Came out in around 1999 or thereabouts, around the turn of the century. And he postulated from that the laws of physics would tend to indicate the existence of God. So again, he's looking at the way the universe functions and deriving certain things from that. And actually, the anthropic principle is part of that notion as well. But we could get into that at some other discussion. But
Anthropic principle and the existence of God. How's that for a title?
yeah,
Okay. I have no idea
we
what the
could do a
anthropic
whole thing
principle
on
is.
Tipler for that matter.
Sure.
It's interesting. But anyway, you can tell a lot about God potentially from the universe that he created. Now, the fundamental thing is that the existence of God, though bottom line, is an assumption. That is, it's an axiom like the axioms in geometry, or like assuming that our senses are giving us accurate information, or that the universe actually exists, that's not imaginary. The existence of God is something that we either assume, or the non-existence of God is something that we assume. That is, there's no way of proving it either way. It's an assumption. And that's always uncomfortable for people. It's uncomfortable for believers to think of God as an assumption. It's uncomfortable for non-believers to think of their atheism as also an assumption. But bottom line, it's the same
Because we
way
like
either
things
way.
to be true.
We want things to be true and provably so. And see, one of the interesting things about the biblical...
We're actually almost out of time.
Oh, yes, we are.
So, Steve...
One of the interesting things about the biblical materials is that it doesn't bother trying to prove the existence of God. It simply assumes his existence. That is, looking at something and saying, that proves there's a God. That's called a God of the gaps. And the idea is, if you can't explain how something happened, then you just say God did it. Well, that's not really a reasonable approach to
Because
things.
then once you figure out how it works,
then God gets smaller.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's not the way it works. That is, just because you can explain, and see, the counter to that is, just because you can explain how something happens doesn't mean that God's not doing it.
Right.
And that's another mistake a lot of Christians make, that they think only what's mysterious, inexplicable, unknown, that's where God is. But if you can explain it and understand it, and it happens on a regular basis, then it's
Or that you can influence it. You're suddenly playing God, so you don't
yes, and
need
so it's
God.
not God. The manna is an interesting example of how our mind, it illustrates how our minds would work. That is, the first day you go out and you find manna, this is pretty spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
But after, 20 years of it, it's just another, like the sun rising.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, this is what happens.
We're sick of this bread, give us meat.
Yeah, it doesn't seem miraculous. You forget that God is the one doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's on a regular basis. And see, everything in life that's on a regular basis, it doesn't mean that God's not there. It's just that we're very used to it.
You just get acclimated.
We get
to
acclimated.
It, yeah. So Steve said he would like to hear more about that. I'm assuming you mean Tippler. So
yeah, as far as I know, the book's still available. It's on Amazon.
Well, I think if we do a show on it, that'd be
Yeah.
a good thing. So, but Steve, you can clarify if that's not what you meant. Okay, so we are at the 5:01 time.
Yeah.
And so we'd like to invite you guys back next Saturday. It's a viewer request. Ryan requested thing on the 3 different views of afterlife.
Well, hell.
Hell,
primarily.
basically, yeah. Universalism, eternal damnation, and what did he call
Annihilationism.
it? And
That you're just annihilated.
oh, okay, annihilationism. So we are going to be discussing that next Saturday. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Join us here every Saturday, except for the Saturdays we're not, at 4 p.m. We also live stream our church services at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So if you are looking for another place to worship, or you don't have a place where you worship, you can join us. The church's Facebook page is Quartz Hill Community Church. We're also on YouTube, so you can find us there. You can find past services there. We've been perfecting our system, so not all the services went out flawlessly. We will warn you of that. We're still working on our sound too. We're hiring somebody to come in and fix our sound system so it comes through. We want it to be as good online as it is in the room, and it's not always happening, so we're still working on that. We have an old soundboard, and so we're having to have somebody come in and balance it out for us. But anyway, we're doing what we can, learning through this pandemic how to do these things. So we hope that you guys will join us again next Saturday for, what was it again?
What about hell?
Yeah, what about hell? So anyway, and Steve said yes, that's what he talked about, Tippler. So we'll add that to our show schedule.
Yeah, we'll do
If you
something on
think of
Tippler.
something during the week that you want to suggest for a show, or a question you have, you can send it to information@theology.edu. Info, sorry, at theology.edu. Not information. It will go nowhere.
Yes, I did not set that up as an email address.
Yes, info@theology.edu.
Now, my name at theology.edu will also come to me. So.
Yes. So anyway, you guys have a good week. Tomorrow we are going to celebrate our grandson's first birthday.
Yes.
You guys, those of you that have been around a long time, we announced that we're going to be grandmas and grandpas, and these are our cups we drink out of every Saturday. So tomorrow,
Oh, and if you notice this thing on my nose, that's from installing a
Dishwasher.
dishwasher this week. I
Banged his
banged my
nose.
face against something.
That's how he rolls.
Yep. Clumsy.
Yep. Okay, you guys have a good one. Take care.
Bye.